Good afternoon. We welcome our witnesses. We want to thank you for being here as we discuss the retirement security of senior citizens, particularly baby boomers. The American senior is in some difficulty of financial trouble. Changes in the retirement system, higher health care cost, and this recent recession have all combined to put baby boomers on a shakier financial footing than their parents and their grandparents. The American dream, if you work hard, play by the rules, you can be rewarded with a comfortable retirement. For some of our seniors, that's fading away. People today are not only retiring with less money coming in, but more money is going out to pay off expenses like debt or medical bills, and that doesn't even factor in the financial challenges faced by seniors with long-term health care needs. So here in the Congress, in the midst that we are now, as we speak, going through a harangue on the floor about whether or not we're going to pay our bills, whether or not we're going to have a continuation of appropriations next Tuesday. Well, it's important to think about all of that impact on the people who are already living with too little to no disposable income. More than 3 in 5 just in my state of Florida on Social Security get at least half of their income from those retirement benefits. Over 3.5 million Floridians, 1 in 5 residents, rely on Medicare. And what about the people in our state who could get Medicaid if the state would expand its program for 1.2 million people under the Affordable Care Act, if the state would expand it to its eligibility? That would cover health care for 1.2 million Floridians that otherwise are between the eligibility levels in the state Medicaid and 138% of poverty. So folks between the ages of 50 and 64 are particularly going to be affected if they don't expand Medicaid until they get to the age of 65 for Medicare. Now, we've had all kinds of stories from my state about how shaky finances are in retirement. Michael Vita of Miami works for a financial planner, so all of his papers and investments are in order. But even he is only bringing in $50 more per month than he has to spend. So any real expense that comes his way could have a real impact on his financial well-being. Jim Marzano of Tampa says he is nowhere near where he was a decade ago before the recession. He's been out of work a total of 3 years. He kept being told he was overqualified for jobs. Now both he and his wife are working, and between the two of them, they are making what he made by himself 11 years ago. So he too will be working for a long time. And so what can be done to stem this tide? What can we do to make sure our seniors have enough money to last them for retirement? And that's what we're here convened today in the Aging Committee. This is a crisis that is not only in the making, it's made. And I hope our witnesses today will shed some light on this. I want to turn to our ranking member, Senator Collins, for her comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank and welcome our new colleague to the Senate, Senator Scott, for coming today.
Welcome.
I know he's very eager to play an active role on this committee, and it's great to have him as well as Senator Warren join us as we explore this very important topic. On January 1st, 2011, the first members of America's baby boom generation celebrated their 65th birthday. Since that day, more than 10 million Americans have reached that milestone, and 10,000 more will be added to that number every day for the next 17 years. After 4 decades in the workforce, these Americans should be confident that they will have the resources to enjoy their retirement years without fearing that they will run out of money and fall into poverty. Yet far too many American seniors struggle to get by and have real reason to fear that they will outlive their savings. Nationally, 1 in 4 retired Americans has no source of income beyond Social Security. In my state, Maine, the number is 1 in 3, and 4 in 10 rely on that vital program for 90% of their retirement income. Bear in mind that Social Security provides an average benefit of just a little over $1,200 per month, less than $15,000 per year. It is hard to imagine stretching those dollars far enough to pay the bills. Certainly, a comfortable retirement appears to be out of the question. The importance of Social Security to low-income retirees cannot be overstated. Social Security benefits represent 85% of the income of low-income retirees. By contrast, retirees in the top income quarter receive just 17% of their income from Social Security. According to a survey published last year, more than half of all Americans are worried that they will not be able to maintain their standard of living in retirement, up sharply from 34% 2 decades ago. And they are right to be concerned. Projections published in the year 2010 by the Employee Benefit Research Institute, known as EBRI, show that nearly half of the early boomers, those between ages 56 and 62, are at risk of not having enough money to pay for basic costs in retirement, including uninsured health care costs. EBRI found that the rate of inadequate retirement income has risen across all age groups and income levels since its previous study in 2003. Early boomers will need to save an additional 3% of compensation each year to cut in half their chances of running out of money in retirement, just to make up for the losses they sustained in the 2008-2009 financial crisis. To a great extent, the decline in retirement security is traceable to the severity of that crisis, which wiped out nearly 1/4 of the accumulated wealth of all U.S. households. Seniors were particularly hard hit. While the weak financial recovery has restored some of their losses, many retirees have been forced to accept a lower standard of living that may well be permanent. Other factors that have weakened retirement security of today's retirees are rising healthcare costs, the need for long-term care, and the fact that Americans are living longer. The shift from employer-based defined benefit plans to defined contribution pension plans like 401ks has also played a role. Employees of smaller businesses are much less likely to participate in employer-based retirement plans. According to a recent GAO study, more than half of the 42 million Americans who work for businesses with fewer than 100 workers lack access to a work-based plan to save for retirement. Proposals to make it easier for small businesses to provide retirement plans for their workers could make a significant difference in financial security for many Americans as long as they do not impose costly new mandates that discourage smaller companies from hiring employees in the first place. Again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for calling this important hearing. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
And after we hear from our witnesses, I'm going to turn over to our committee members' questions, and then I'll do a cleanup of remaining questions of you all. We're delighted to have you all today. Your written testimony will be entered into the record. I'd ask you to keep your comments to about 5 minutes so we can get into the questions. And we're going to have Ms. Joni Jacobson. She is a senior. She is experiencing some of these difficulties that we have talked about. Dr. Olivia Mitchell, International Foundation of Employee Benefit Plans professor at the Wharton School. Paula Kalamafada. Close. Give it to me. Kalamafda. And she is chair of the Small Business Council of America. And Richard Johnson, Dr. Richard Johnson, Senior Fellow and Director, Program on Retirement Policy at the Urban Institute. So we welcome you all. Ms. Jacobson, we'll start with you.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Nelson, Senators Collins, Scott, Ms. Warren. My name is Joanne Femino Jacobson. I'm 63 years old. I was born, grew up, and lived in Massachusetts until I was 56. And I now live in Venice, Florida, whose average age, by the way, is 67.6. So I'm speaking for the other 24,000 people that live there. I have 2 sons who still live in New England, one in Massachusetts and one in New Hampshire. I have saved money. I supported my sons. I planned for retirement. Yet when I reached what should have been my retirement age, the promise that I would receive health and benefits for the rest of my life was broken. And so were my hopes of retiring comfortably in Florida. Like many baby boomers battered by the recession, I am still in the workforce and will probably remain on the job for the foreseeable future. I have worked in some form since I was 15 years old. Although I dropped out of college at 20 because my father got sick, I had a good job at the phone company, as we used to call it, then AT&T. I got married, got divorced, raised 2 sons with no support. I worked for the phone company for 18 years, got my bachelor's degree at night, which enabled me to get a promotion into management. Thus, I was able to send my sons to college and also returned to college and got my master's degree at 50. In January of 2002, I was laid off at age 52, 9 months short of full retirement after 30 years. It was a time when thousands of management employees were being laid off and downsizing measures in many industries. During my time at the phone company, I did all the things I was supposed to do. Even though I was enrolled in the company's defined benefit pension plan, I also participated in the company savings plan. I even bought a few stocks. I participated in financial planning offered by the company, and I kept track of my promised and retirement earnings benefits. Right here, all my booklets I've saved all these years. I began planning my retirement in my 30s. My goal was to retire to Florida in my 50s, and I'm a results-oriented type of person. All of my financial and retirement planning was centered on my employer's promised benefits and pension and retirement health care benefits. All that was factored into my budget for retirement. After being laid off, I spent the next few years in 3 different jobs before fulfilling one of my retirement dreams, which was moving to Florida. Because I was concerned about what would happen to my pension payments in retirement, given all the turbulence of the company and changing of ownership, I took a lump sum payout and rolled it over into an IRA. I was not in any position to stop working with children in college. However, I took a series of jobs that were all, unfortunately, adversely impacted by the recession. One company went out of business. One government job, Sarasota County, was eliminated. Even finding a job was tough because I suspect I was a victim of age discrimination. But still, at the age of 62, I felt confident enough about my financial status to convert my IRAs into annuities and enroll in Social Security benefits. 6 weeks after I enrolled in Social Security, out of the blue, and 1 day before the Affordable Care Act was ratified, I received a letter from my company that took over the pension plan, stating that they would no longer provide health care benefits and would even discontinue my life insurance. Try buying life insurance after you're 60 years old. For those people 65 and older, the rescission of these benefits took place almost immediately, within 30 days. For those under 65, like me, health care premiums increased immediately. My health care premium doubled. All of the company's subsidies for health care will stop at the end of this year when Affordable Care Act takes effect. I have shopped around for health care plans. They all will be very expensive, especially if I want long-term care at my age. So I'm back at work as a realtor to pay for health care. My annuities, my Social Security barely cover my basic costs of mortgage, taxes, ever-escalating insurance, car payments, utilities, daily living, business expenses. But then I can't make too much money drawing Social Security benefits because they will be taken away. Because I've not hit full retirement age of 66. Although I visited my Social Security office 4 times in the last year, I did not learn until coming here that the money would not be withheld forever, that I will get enhanced benefit at age 66. Regardless, that doesn't help me now. Because living on a limited budget the last year or so, I've had to charge doctor's visits, dentist visits, along with unanticipated expenses to my credit cards. Until now, my debt has always been manageable and my credit rating near 800. Now it has swollen to 5 figures and my credit rating has been diminished. I even lost an opportunity to refinance my house because my credit score had dropped. So there's no vacations or cruises or luxury items for me. There will be no thoughts of ever retiring, and I'll still be working into the unforeseeable future or until my health holds out. But what we're seeing here is we're witnessing the demise of the pension system in America as major corporations divest themselves of their fiduciary responsibilities to long-tenured employees and retirees. These corporations have ignored their obligation to fulfill pension benefits stated in writing as part of the employee and retirement compensation package, making it an option, not an obligation. What we need here is relief. This is truly a life or death matter. People will die for the lack of affordable and quality health care. So I thank you today for inviting me to share my story, and I ultimately welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobson. Dr. Mitchell.
Thank you for inviting me to discuss the changing face of retirement security in America. My name is Olivia Mitchell, and I'm a professor at the Wharton School and director of the Pension Research Council. As a researcher and as a baby boomer, I commend you for bringing up this important issue. I believe, like many here, that this is a very challenging time to be reaching retirement age. 30 years ago, my parents retired. At that time, they had a secure lifetime pension, a generous retiree medical plan. Interest rates were high enough to secure them a steady income without spending down their nest eggs too quickly. They also had inflation-protected lifetime benefits from Social Security and Medicare, and they held no debt. Moreover, they had 4 children they'd sent to college who were always ready to help them out. By contrast, we boomers face a very different future. We worry that Social Security and Medicare, as well as the disability insurance system, are fragile. Few of us have retiree medical coverage or traditional defined benefit pensions. Some of us with defined contribution plans have not put enough in, and what we've put in, we've seen decline. Nor are we converting our assets into lifetime income so that we can't run out in old age. Interest rates are so low that holding tips is a losing proposition. And with longer lifespans in the offing, we very much need protection for long-term care costs, but the products simply are not available or unaffordable. And the topic of my discussion today is debt. Many more boomers are in debt than ever before. In a recent report, I compared 3 cohorts of people, age 56 to 61, in the Health and Retirement Study. This is a study where you can follow cohorts over their lifetimes. We focused on people age 56 to 61 in 1992, in 2002, and in 2008. For each group, right on the threshold of retirement, we measured total debt as well as the ratio of debt to assets. Additionally, we focused on patterns of financial fragility using both the HRS and the FINRA National Financial Capability Study, known as NFCS. We came to 2 major conclusions about older Americans' debt levels. First, Americans today are much more likely to arrive at retirement with debt than in the past. For the earlier group, back in the early 1990s, about 64% held debt. Over 70% of the boomers now do so. Moreover, not only do more people hold debt, they hold more debt. That is, median debt more than quadrupled between 1992 to 2008. And the top quarter of the distribution, owing the most, owed $50,000 back in the early 90s. They now owe over $100,000. This is important because boomers retiring in the next several years are much more likely to carry this debt into retirement compared to previous cohorts. And since debt payments typically rise faster than interest rates that retirees can earn on their investments, people will likely be more vulnerable during retirement. Now, a key reason we found that boomers are facing retirement with so much more debt is they spent more on housing than did previous generations. As a result, boomers are much more likely to have very expensive primary residences. Of course, some of those declined somewhat in value over the last few years, and their mortgage values have grown faster than the values of their homes. Median home loans relative to assets rose from 6% back in the early 90s to over 25% now. So boomers will need to continue servicing their home loans into retirement, and they're going to continue being much more leveraged than groups in the past. We drilled down further to look more closely at debt, and we found that in addition to mortgage debt, boomers have had expensive financial habits. They have not paid off their credit cards in full. They've used their credit cards for cash advances. They're charged fees for late payments or exceeding their credit card bills. Another piece of the story is medical bills, also a source of financial problems. This has been mentioned by almost a quarter of the baby boomers. Even more striking was the fact that only about a third said that they thought they could not come up, that only about a third said that they were likely to be able to come up with $2,000 in the next month if faced with an unexpected bill. And this is not a huge bill. This might be a car repair bill or a moderate-sized home bill. So in the wake of the financial crisis and the Great Recession, we now know that more can be done to protect Americans from these problems. We know in particular that there's a strong positive link between financial literacy, planning, saving for retirement, and assets into retirement. Those who are not financially savvy are much more likely to have debt and have lower savings. Now, protective legislation can be useful when people lack the opportunity to make repeated purchases, such as, for example, with annuities, where probably you buy them once. It can also be helpful to better inform Americans when they face potentially expensive decisions that they don't really understand, such as buying a home, taking out a mortgage, cashing out their 401k plans, or taking out credit card loans. I also believe boomers could do better with more access to financial advice, which could generate potentially important rewards in the form of lower debt for those nearing retirement. They also need more information on the benefits of delaying claiming their Social Security benefit. In fact, a number of baby boomers have already reached this conclusion on their own. For example, delaying claiming benefits from 62 to 70, not that that's what everyone should do, but that in itself will mean an additional 76% more in monthly payments. That can do a lot to help the income streams in retirement. Let me stop there and thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Ms. Kalam-Fadi.
Still Kalamafta. The small business Kalamafta, but quite honestly, I was the kid at school who all the teachers knew me by my first name, like the first day of school. They didn't want to deal with my last name, so just you can call me Paula. So the Small Business Council of America and the Small Business Legislative Council appreciate the opportunity today to be submitting this testimony to you. The SBCA is a national nonprofit organization which represents the interests of privately held and family-owned businesses in the federal tax, healthcare, employee benefit matters. Through our members, we represent well over 20,000 successful small businesses in the retail, manufacturing, service industries. Virtually all of our members provide health insurance and retirement plan benefits for their employees. That's a somewhat unusual statistic for small businesses, but that is the SBCA's statistic. The SBLC is a 35-year-old permanent independent coalition of 50 trade and professional associations that share a common commitment to the future of small business. And again, the SBLC members represent areas as diverse as manufacturing, retailing, distribution, professional technical services, construction, transportation, and agriculture. And the way we decide our policies is it's developed by consensus of all those different trade associations hammering out what they think will work in the small business area. I am the chair of the Small Business Council of America. I'm a member of the board of directors and a past chair of the SBLC. I'm also a practicing tax attorney, and I practice in the area of retirement plans and employee benefits. And I'm here today to present our views as to how important retirement plans are to America's retirement security, also to discuss how small business retirement plan coverage can be increased. And finally, I wanted to discuss ways to incentivize employees to increase their savings inside the retirement plan. We have some statistics that are pretty startling. One of these statistics is, and this was done by EBRI, that individuals of all economic levels are more likely to save inside a retirement plan than outside a retirement plan. And the actual statistic is workers are 14 times more likely to save in a retirement plan offered by their employer than to save through an IRA. 14 times more likely. For those of us who work with small businesses, and of course now this statistic applies across the board, so this goes to mid-sized and larger businesses as well, the magic is payroll deduction. So you have your paycheck, it's the contribution you're making to the plan is automatically taken out of that paycheck. There's nothing the employee is doing. It's all on automatic pilot. And not only did you not have to do anything to get the money into the retirement plan, but it's not in your pocket. So it's much harder to think of spending it because it's not there. I think we all have we've all walked down the street with $1 in our pocket and without $1 in our pocket, and we know what happens. When you don't have it in your pocket, you don't spend it. So the retirement security of our nation is intended to rest primarily upon 3 sources. And very often you may have heard this referred to as the 3-legged stool. The first is Social Security. The second is the voluntary private retirement plan system. And the third is individual savings. Today, well, we know Social Security is a defined benefit system. It is based on an annuity type of framework. There's not that much choice on the part of the individuals with Social Security. You can pick a few different start dates, and that's about it. You cannot outlive your payments coming from Social Security. The qualified voluntary private retirement system today is primarily based on a defined contribution system. And methods of payment out of these plans can include annuities, installments, usually that's coming from an IRA, lump sums, or a combination of one or more of those different methods of payment. The voluntary private retirement system is heavily regulated by Department of Labor and IRS. But even though it's heavily regulated, there's a lot of flexibility in the system so that small businesses and mid-sized and large businesses are able to create retirement plans that fit their particular business, their particular employee census the best. Of course, individual savings is totally open-ended, and initially it was thought that this would be done outside a retirement plan because it really wasn't until the 401k plan that it became clear that this was going to be a major vehicle for Americans to save. The Social Security system, I think we all know, is probably in pretty good shape. I imagine with some, I don't believe, great amounts of shoring, it would be made successful, but I can understand it be painfully political to shore it up. The private retirement system is in fairly good shape, large part due to a series of laws that were passed by Congress in the last 2 decades that recognized that the system had become too complex, that there was not enough in the system for small business owners to join the system, and the result of that is those laws reversed it, so the cost-benefit analysis for small business owners became so that an owner would say it makes sense for my company to sponsor a retirement plan because the benefits to the owners outweighed the costs and burdens that were inherent in that system. Let's just talk about payroll deduction quickly, because we know it's an easy and painless way to save. We know it's done automatically by the employer. We know it's much harder to spend money you don't have. And the third thing about it is in the 401k area, also the 403b plan area, employees do not have easy access to the money. So not only is it taken away automatically, it's sort of locked inside. You can get to it by loans and hardship, but neither of those are easy ways to get to your money. So the money keeps growing tax-free. I hope by now you're understanding that part of what I'm getting to is encouraging savings inside a retirement plan is a very good thing for all of us to do, and that we should be trying to educate all employees, particularly younger employees, to take advantage of this feature in their plan. Interestingly, what we do know is it does not matter if it's a large business, a mid-sized business, or a small business. Once a plan is offered to an employee, it's almost the same take-up rate by the employees, regardless of the size of entities. So once again, we know that it's to the benefit of the retirement security of our Americans to promote these plans, encourage formation of the retirement plans, particularly in the small business sector. 2 other things we know are very successful right now, and it's somewhat startling. One is auto-enrollment, and what auto-enrollment means is when an employee is hired, they are automatically enrolled in the plan. To get out of the plan, you have to take steps to say, I don't want to be in the plan, take me out. So you're automatically enrolled. The other is auto-escalation, which means that you might start off with a 3% contribution being made, meaning the employee is putting 3% of their income, their compensation from that employer, into the plan. The next year it might be 4%, next year 5%, next year 6%. That's called auto-escalation. And you would think I mean, I would think when I first started hearing about these is, why is this successful? And then when I started realizing and thinking about what I know about small business employees, not only from my own business, but from SBCA members, is inertia is a huge thing going out there with small business employees, and I'm not sure I know why, but it is easier to be enrolled and stay enrolled than it is to take all the steps to get yourself out of the plan. And the same thing, it's easier to let the savings go in the plan than to take the steps to get out of it. So we know that that is also a very, very effective thing. Finally, okay, am I way over my time here? Okay, then I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mrs. Kalamafti. Dr. Johnson?
Thank you. Chairman Nelson, Ranking Member Collins, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the challenges confronting our retirement income system. As you know, concern is growing about how well future retirees will fare. And we've been tackling this question at the Urban Institute, and we've been using our modeling capabilities to project retirement incomes for boomers and later generations. And so today I'd like to share the results from that research and some of the conclusions that I draw from them. So first, a bit of good news. Retirement incomes will continue to increase over the next 30 years, even after accounting for inflation, because women are earning more than ever, productivity gains will boost average wages in the economy, and many people are delaying retirement and working longer. But now the bad news. More Americans will see their living standards fall as they enter retirement because retirement incomes are not projected to keep pace with earnings. Now, it's not clear how much income is necessary for retirees to live as comfortably as they did in retirement, but a common rule of thumb is that they need about 75% of their pre-retirement earnings. And the thinking here is that they need less money than they did while working because they don't have to cover employment costs, they don't have to pay payroll taxes, and they don't have to save for retirement. Now, we project that over the next 30 years, the share of 70-year-olds who can't meet this 75% replacement rate threshold will increase from 25% today to 30%. So that's a 5 percentage point increase over about 30 years. This decline in retirement preparedness may not qualify as a retirement crisis, but it certainly is a worrisome trend. And a bigger threat to retirement security, however, is rising healthcare costs. Older Americans already devote a substantial portion of their incomes to health care. Although Medicare covers nearly all adults ages 65 and older, many end up paying substantial costs out of pocket because of premiums, deductibles, and uncovered services. Half of all Americans ages 65 and older now spend more than 12% of their incomes on health care. And among those with incomes below 200% of the poverty level, half spend more than a fifth, more than 20%, of their incomes on health care. Out-of-pocket health care spending by older Americans is projected to rise sharply in coming decades as health care costs continue to grow. A common benchmark for burdensome health care spending is 20% of income. Now, if health care spending grows at the intermediate rates assumed by the Medicare trustees, in 2040, about 45% of all adults 65 and older will experience burdensome costs, including about 70% of those in the bottom 2/5 of the income distribution. Now, perhaps the greatest financial risk for older Americans is the prospect of becoming disabled and needing expensive long-term care. One estimate indicates that 7 in 10 Americans who survive to age 65 will eventually need long-term services and supports, and 1 in 5 will need help for 5 or more years. Most will receive informal help from family and friends, often creating significant financial, physical, and emotional burdens for their helpers. However, increasing numbers of older Americans will receive home care from paid helpers, especially as family caregivers become less available because family sizes are falling, and middle-aged women who provide most of the informal care today are now working more than in the past. And as many as half of older adults may end up in nursing homes. Long-term care costs are prohibitive. A year of nursing home care in a semi-private room now averages about $80,000 nationwide, with average costs as much as 75% higher in certain parts of the country. A frail older adult receiving 60 hours of paid home care per month, that's the median amount, would incur costs of about $15,000 per year. We lack a system to adequately finance these costs. Standard health insurance plans do not cover long-term care, and Medicare covers long-term care only in special circumstances. Only about 12% of adults 65 and older have private long-term care insurance, and there are signs that this private market is shrinking. As a result, long-term care costs can quickly deplete household savings, and many long-term care recipients, especially those with extended nursing home stays, end up going on Medicaid, which requires that beneficiaries surrender nearly all of their income and wealth. Because out-of-pocket medical and long-term care costs are substantial and growing, seniors may need as much money in retirement as when they were working. But according to our projections, 45% of those born between 1970 and 74 will lack enough income at age 70 to replace all of their pre-retirement earnings. So as Congress grapples with these issues, I would recommend focusing on protecting incomes for the most vulnerable seniors, ensure Social Security's long-term financial health, and add a meaningful minimum benefit. Modernize the Supplemental Security Income Program by increasing asset limits for beneficiaries. Protect seniors from catastrophic medical expenses by setting a limit on out-of-pocket Medicare, and create a national mandatory program to help families finance long-term care. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Okay, we're going to get into some questions now. Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jacobson, I want to thank you very much for coming today and sharing your personal experience. It's important that we put a human face on the issue that we're discussing, and you did just that in sharing your personal experience, so I thank you for that. I'm curious about your case because it seems like you planned, you did everything right, you were frugal. I mean, if you had a credit rating of 800, that's awfully good. You were paying your bills.
777 to be exact.
There you go. And yet here you find yourself in difficult circumstances beyond your control. Yes. So I'm wondering what happened to the pension that you were promised, because if a company goes bankrupt, we have the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation to which premiums are paid that is supposed to step in. Now, you would have gotten a lower pension amount, but you would have gotten something. So why didn't that happen in your case? Do you know?
Okay, well, let me clarify. I do have my pension itself because I took it as a lump sum and rolled it into an IRA because I didn't know what the company was going to be called tomorrow. It's my health care benefits and my life insurance and all the benefits that now cost us thousands of dollars a year to, come up with. So that has not been factored into the retirement budget. What Verizon is doing now is what they call de-risking, and it has sold off its pensions to another company, Prudential in this case, to avoid paying the premiums to the PGBC. So now it's not guaranteed to the rest of those employees. I got out when it was, and I took the money and left.
So people after you are in even worse situations.
People that are collecting an annuities now are not collecting it from the mother company, Verizon. They're collecting it from Prudential, which does not guarantee it, which is not covered by the PBGC.
Very interesting. Thank you.
It's called de-risking.
Thank you for...
Could I add, but you were 9 months shy of retirement.
Retirement, right.
What would that have given you?
That would have given me more dollars for my medical benefits.
Would it have increased the size of your pension?
That too, somewhat, yes, correct.
Dr. Mitchell, you made an incredibly important point about the potential benefits for some people of delaying claiming benefits under Social Security. And obviously, we see a significant number of seniors collecting Social Security at age 62, and sometimes for excellent reasons. Some of them may be working in physically very demanding jobs, and they need that income and cannot continue. But we know that minimum benefit, and Dr. Johnson touched on this, for Social Security is extremely low. I've always felt that when we look at Social Security reform, we need to increase that minimum benefit, but that's a whole nother issue. My question for you is, do you think that seniors understand what a huge difference it makes in their Social Security lifetime benefits delaying the receipt? I was shocked at the 76% figure that you gave, and I follow this fairly closely. So what should Social Security, the Social Security Administration, be doing to make sure that seniors understand that if they choose age 62, they're going to get far less than if they are able to delay the receipt? Sometimes they can't, or there are good reasons not to.
Excellent question. Up until very recently, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, the Social Security field agents had a policy of describing this choice about when to claim your benefits in terms of a so-called break-even level. So, for example, they might say, if you claim at 62, you get $1,000 a month, just to pick a number out of the air. If you work one more year, you'll get $1,127.27 more a month. But then they would say, do you realize that you would forfeit the $12,000 plus the interest you could have earned on it, and they use the F word, forfeit, if you don't live for sure another 14 years. Now, that obviously gives people the cold chills, and they think, oh, I don't want to forfeit anything, and so they tend to be encouraged to take it earlier. I will say that the Social Security field agents have moved away from that presentation. Nonetheless, in surveys of financial advisors, 2/3 of the financial advisors today still use that forfeit break-even presentation. So absolutely right, we do not inform people well enough about what a good deal it might be if you can afford to delay, maybe not till 70, but a year or two, it's the best deal going. In terms of lifetime protection, inflation index benefits, you can't get it anywhere else.
Thank you. And finally, very quickly, Paula, I'm not going to try, but could you tell us just quickly, if you could pick one policy change that you would recommend to us to encourage, not mandate, but encourage more small businesses to provide retirement plans for their employees, what would it be?
I think I'm going to answer that in the negative. The most important thing Congress could do is not cut back on the contribution levels to retirement plans. In the small business world, the owners are making the contributions to the plan in effect out of the profits of the company, which if they didn't put it into the retirement plan or put it back in the business, they would take out as compensation. So they are making the contributions for themselves and for all their employees. And if there is not enough of a benefit in the plan to encourage them to save, then it makes sense for them to take it out as compensation or put it back into the business otherwise, but not to put it in the retirement plan. So the number one thing is, you know, with all of the policy issues you all are facing with debt reduction and tax expenditures, the tax expenditure for the retirement plan system is a huge number. And yet, if you look at it one way, it's not even an expenditure because it's money, the money that the government's foregoing by having people put money into the plan and having it grow tax-free comes back to the fisc at the time the people retire and the money comes back. So the real cost is the time value of money. That's what the government's losing. But because of the way it's being shown on the budget windows, it looks like a total loss that never comes back in. So I know there's a number of proposals trying to cut back on the retirement plan contributions, and all of those would really hurt.
Senator Warren has done quite a bit of research on senior debt as a professor. Senator Warren?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you and Ranking Member Collins for doing this hearing. You all show such greater leadership every time in these, and getting these issues out here, powerfully important. You know, I think it's fundamental that we all believe that if you work hard, you ought to be able to retire with dignity. And yet, Social Security provides just the barest minimum for most people, and rising costs for food, rising costs for health care, rising costs for drugs, is really putting the squeeze on families. And the Chairman mentioned, you're right, I did a lot of research on this. I spent a lot of time working on how families struggle economically. And among the different studies I did was one that showed that families from 1991 to 2007, we saw a 150% increase in the percentage of people over the age of 65 who were forced to file for bankruptcy. In bankruptcy because of rising medical costs out of pocket, in bankruptcy because of divorce or the death of a spouse as families break up, in bankruptcy even at that age because they lost jobs that they needed to be able to keep their budgets together. So I've seen this, and I know it's a terrible problem. I appreciate the work you're doing to bring this to our attention, and thank you, Ms. Jacobson. As Ranking Member Collins said, it's very important to have a personal face on this, and I appreciate your coming here today. I'd just like to ask a question about helping people save more for retirement. The idea of how they can best take care of themselves. And we know from the research that if there's an employer-sponsored plan, I think as you said, Ms. Kalamafta, that we'll see more people in that plan. I think you said 14 times as many people will get into a retirement plan if we've got employer sponsorship of those plans. And yet we know from the Employment Benefits Research Institute that about half of all employers offer no retirement plan of any kind, and that the GAO tells us that for companies that have 100 or fewer employees, the rate at which that 72% offer no retirement plans of any kind. Now, as I understand it, for small businesses, since this is obviously a problem, fewer small businesses are offering retiree plans, that one of the principal reasons they talk about are the high administrative costs, that it's very expensive for small businesses to do this, and so businesses have pooled together. We have the multiple employer plans so that small businesses can work together to try to get benefits for their employees. Now, today I joined Chairman Nelson and Senator Murray in a letter to the Department of Treasury encouraging them to go forward with rulemaking to protect small businesses in the multiple employer plans by ensuring that an entire plan will not become disqualified in the event that one particular company breaks the rules, the bad apple problem. And so what I'd like to do is just ask, if you could, I thought I'd start with you, Ms. Kalamafta, if you could just speak briefly to the question of how important it is to remove obstacles so that small businesses are more likely to participate in employer-sponsored pension plans.
Well, that is critical. But I want to start off by saying that I think the GAO study, as far as coverage in the small business sector, is wrong, and that there is a study that was done in 2011 by the Social Security Administration that relied on W-2 data rather than surveying employees. And what they found was, and I've got this exactly in my report, but basically, if you were looking at a small business, and I'll just pick one side, that employs 25 employees but less than 50, 60% of those businesses offer retirement plans. So the numbers are much better. And again, those of us who work in this area are not surprised because employees very often don't even know they're making 401k contributions to the plan, and even more strangely, they don't even know their company's making contributions for them. So, the world is not as dark as we thought. It's much better than we thought. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't encourage more formation, because the more formation, and we know people take up the 401k, so the savings in the plan, so that's the way to go. MEPs, I applaud you trying to get rid of the bad apple rule. It's not a fair rule. Basically, in a MEP where you have a group of employers coming together, if one of them has a plan that's disqualified, it disqualifies all the plans that were covered. I think the goal of the MEP to lower administrative costs is a good goal. I have a feeling it would end up like a lowest common denominator type of plan. Hopefully it'd be like a starter plan, because I have a feeling that the choices as far as investment choices and whatever would not be as good as you would normally get in a regular brokerage house or insurance company plan.
So if I can, Mr. Chairman, can I just follow up with one more question on pensions, and then we'll have this one out here, because I just think it's so important. And that is whether we're talking about 40% of the employees of small businesses not having any employer-sponsored plan, or whether we're talking about 70% not having them. It's still way too many. And we're looking for ways to try to get more people into employer-sponsored plans. So I want to ask one more question about that. And that is that the GAO also found that small businesses pay higher fees than larger employers, and that small businesses, because they lack the economies of scale of larger employers, sometimes are just left out here, and that much of the increased cost comes from the lack of expertise of the small businesses in picking these plans and having to deal with these plans. So last year, the Department of Labor implemented new 401k employee fee disclosures to try to help small businesses and participants better understand the fees they're paying. And I understand that disclosure is always enormously valuable. I'm never going to object to having more disclosure. But the real question I have is, would it be more helpful if we just made these rules simpler and encourage the Department of Labor to get simpler rules out there for the employers and for the employees? Dr. Mitchell, would you like to speak to that?
Being against simplification, I think, is un-American, but absolutely. I've been working in this area for 30 years.
Let me just say it this way. Would it make a real difference? Maybe that's the way I should put it. Everyone's in favor of it, but do you think it would make a real difference?
Well, the issue is that Congress has used tax law and a number of other laws to shape the environment in which we save for retirement. So there's a certain amount you can put in tax qualified, there's a certain amount you can take out without a penalty, there's certain ages. It is very complicated. I do believe that the research has shown, however, that automatic enrollment works. If you have an employer who can put in place a pension and pop everybody into it, people stay in it. They know they should be saving for retirement. There's also the issue of, if you auto-enroll people, what do you put them into in terms of investments? I think Congress did the right thing and the Labor Department did the right thing in putting folks into target date funds. Again, there's a big variety of them, but by and large, it's better than holding your money in money market funds for the next 70 years. The big question is, what happens at retirement? So those of us that have defined contribution plans, 401k plans, get there with a lump sum, and then we're left adrift. How do we manage the money so we don't outspend it in retirement? So I think that's the crucial issue, how to inform people, how to make employers comfortable with helping people through the payout phase.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Scott.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Mitchell, in the insurance business, we call that too much month at the end of the money. Unfortunately, it's an often occurrence. Ms. Kalamafta, a couple questions on the simplification process for small businesses who want to engage in finding plans. I spent, I guess, 25 years of my professional life in the insurance business trying to find a way to create access and information as well as education to those employers, especially the smaller ones, 1 employee to 10 they were clueless, really, on the number of opportunities and options in the marketplace for as little as $400 or $500 a year to get one plan started. And so my question to you is a question on time horizons and tax preferences. One, the plans are pretty simple. You can get a age-weighted plan from one of the major mutual fund companies for a very small fee to get it started. So the question really comes down to the knowledge horizon. With all the stuff going on in small businesses, the space for making retirement decisions seems to be eliminated because of the lack of profit being made over the last 5 to 7 years. Would you comment on the notion of positioning small employers to make good decisions on doing the research so they know that what's available in the marketplace?
Great question. And I have to applaud those in the insurance industry because they have gotten it that the 30-second soundbite and a single piece of paper with charts on it and colors goes a long way with a small business owner rather than a 10-page legal document where they're going, oh, I'm not going to read this today. We do know from the Small Business Administration that half of all small businesses don't make it through the first 5 years.
Right.
So if you're a business in that first 5 years, the chances are you sitting around thinking about retirement benefits for yourself or anyone else, probably not. Hopefully, you're trying to keep the business alive. After 10 years, only a third make it through. Those are pretty sad statistics. However, the ones that do make it through are very stable. And because the owners, most of the small businesses are not going to be able to be sold. So they can't rely on the business for their retirement security. And we know there's the non-qualified deferred compensation world, which is so important in the larger businesses, is not in the small business world because of the tax code. So I would think one of the most important things would be for accountants and insurance people to advise the small business owners. And in fact, we often find that it's the accountant who is the first person to talk to the small business owners and say, you know, you've got some profit this year. You can put in a retirement plan. And I agree with you. I think plans are fairly easy to be put in, and I don't think they're that expensive. There's a number of brokerage houses out there who are very good at doing it now, and insurance companies, you know, and I'm probably have missed somebody else in that world, but trade associations are putting together plans. I mean, the problem isn't the plan, and there's some very good investment advice out there. I mean, if you look at a typical 401k plan today, from the employee's viewpoint, they can go on a website. They can see their different fund choices. They see how much they've saved. They usually have a pie chart that shows them what they've done. If they don't want to do any of that, they just go into the default, which is almost always a target fund. So the real magic is getting them to the plan.
Yes.
And I really think the advisors are the key.
Okay. Dr. Mitchell, perhaps on the whole dysfunction of our tax code and how to incent more dysfunction, my next comments will help us get there quickly. So I have a notion that the long-term care component, which of course is not covered by your health insurance plan, so the whole financial literacy concept needs to include, fuse into it, the notion that long-term care and the activities of daily living that is the trigger for it to start aren't a part of your health insurance, nor will it be. So my question really is on a tax preference in the tax code that would provide some type of tax incentives to purchase long-term care, the impact of that, and my second question for any of the panelists as I run out of time here in 35 seconds, is a question about simple math. So part of the challenge that we face today for our seniors will be repeated, except for it will be exacerbated over the next generation, where 50, 60 years ago we had 16 Americans working, we had 1 retired, and the expiration happened 3 years later. Today, we have 3 working with 1 retired, and the expiration happens 15 years later. So we're dealing with a problem of math, and I'd love to have someone talk about how we change the contributions that are necessary for us to sustain a system that's based on a formula that is obsolete. And the first question being a question about tax preferences as it relates to long-term care and or those types of things that would allow for folks to make better decisions because they have the tax incentive to do so.
Well, long-term care is one of the most fraught challenges that I think we really face. Recently, my employer decided to offer long-term care not as a tax-subsidized vehicle, but as a payroll deduction off of my paycheck. And I finally bought it. I dropped my life insurance and bought the long-term care insurance because I figured that's the next challenge. 2% of employees at most, in my experience, in an employer setting buy long-term care when it's offered to active workers. And you might think, well, we could wait and do it later when we retire. But by that point, you may well be underwritten. You may be uninsurable. And so it's a very, very big challenge. One of the concerns also is that in an environment where we can't predict future medical care costs very well, and we can't predict longevity very well, then the insurance companies themselves, and I'm sure you know this from your experience, don't really know what they're insuring. So as a consequence, there's a lot of passing the buck going on, a lot of people not knowing what they can afford to do. When they do buy coverage, it gets more expensive. All I can say is there are other models that may be worth your while to go take a look at what they did in Japan. They've actually mandated long-term care insurance, which is privately provided, but everybody from the age of 40 has to pay into a pool, so you don't get any adverse selection. Everybody's covered. That hasn't corrected the problem, but it does mean that there's more protection. The benefits are also means tested, I would add. So if it turns out you're quite wealthy when you get to retirement age, you get less than if you don't.
Thank you, Senator Scott. You know, we passed a Long-Term Care Act, and it was so expensive that then we had to backtrack. Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I could ask Dr. Mitchell, the GAO has identified about 15 different agencies trying to give financial literacy service. Millions and millions of dollars are being spent, and nothing seems to be, the results haven't changed. Do you have recommendations to us about how we could help you streamline this system?
I've been doing some work recently with a colleague of mine, Anna Maria Luzardi, and what we've done is survey baby boomers as well as younger people and, in fact, people all around the world about the key, fundamental, simple financial facts that you need to know in order to be able to make smart financial decisions. So we've asked questions, for example, and this is, I'm not putting you to a test. We won't make you answer.
No, I'm asking you. Hold
suppose
on.
you had $100 in a savings account.
1 second. Let me ask you. We know the GAO has identified 15 different federal agencies spending $60 to $70 million a year. Mm-hmm. You're watching all this, and we're not seeing the results sitting here. So if the GAO has given us a report that there should be some consolidation, can you identify for us the overlapping agencies that maybe should be consolidated rather than individually just keeping these alive?
So my answer to you would be, before we decide to consolidate, we ought to figure out what are what's in the core curriculum. What is it that Americans need to know? And then with that benchmark, we can go out and say, what are these folks providing? What kind of information they're providing? The other issue is that baby boomers and people older than they are maybe not web friendly. So that if a lot of the information is on the web, they're much more likely to be going and trusting their Social Security field agent than 101 different other providers. So we have to figure out first what they need to know, and I think interest compounding is critical, and risk diversification is critical. And then we ought to figure out who is the most trusted conduit of that information and work that route. That would be my recommendation.
I think we're on 2 different pages. I'm just saying there's 15. Have you evaluated what they're trying to educate my generation on, whether I'm web-friendly or not web-friendly? Do I have 15 doing the same thing? Do I have 10 doing the same thing? Can you recommend that this should not happen? We should have maybe a portal with 1 or 2 doing what 15 are doing now. That's what I would ask you to evaluate. I only have so much time, so maybe we'll get more.
Let's talk offline, because I can give you some recommendations of some useful studies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Johnson, nursing home care. I was a former governor of the state of West Virginia, and it's a great concern. I have an elderly population. But I just saw the inhumane treatment when a person who has been a breadwinner all their life had to divest themselves of all their money in order to become Medicaid recipient. something's just not right there. When you take everything away from a hardworking individual and saying, guess what, now you're going to be a ward of the state, there's got to be a better way to do it. Have you all looked into that, or can you give us any recommendations or help on that? I've always thought need-based sliding fee scale. So my mother or father, if God forbid if they would have needed that, they could at least feel like they were taking care of and providing for their own care a little bit. Now they have to basically, as a 2-year period of time, they divest all their assets and worldly possessions in order to get down to the poverty level so Medicaid kicks in. 80% of the people in nursing homes are on Medicaid. In my state, I don't know if that's national average, but I know it's high because they learn how to scam the system.
That's certainly true, and it's our system of financing nursing home care is almost non-existent, and so there's kind of two approaches have been suggested. One is to try to get more people to purchase private insurance, basically get more people to save on their own, either put lots of money away so you can cover this nursing home expense when you need it, and that's almost impossible to do because the costs are so high. And the other alternative is to get them to purchase private insurance. Right now, only 12% of seniors have private insurance, private long-term care insurance. We see that there's very little effect of tax incentives. It increases it a little bit, but not much. We tried to have a voluntary system in the Class Act that was recently repealed. That doesn't work because you have a whole set of adverse selection problems. Only the sickest people are going to join this program. That means the program isn't sustainable. It seems to me that one solution is to include more long-term care costs within Medicare. Perhaps raising premiums, raising taxes, raising payroll taxes, having the payroll tax contribute and fund some of these future long-term care benefits. That's a way, though, that you would at least avoid this problem of people having to forego all of their assets to get.
I'm just saying that the nursing home industry does a great job. They take care of people and do it well, and we're very pleased in our state with mostly all the nursing home care that we're giving. And they've been brought to my attention that a person is demeaned to the point to where they get an allowance or allowed to have so much money and not and this and that, and they just even would think that, and the families too, if they could pay a certain percentage of that income towards a sliding fee scale or means testing, would help an awful lot more with adding dignity and I think a little respect to an elderly person who's made their way or paid their way all their life. And I don't know if you all looked, and we'll talk, I know my time's up, we'll talk about that later, but that's what we're trying to find, some way with dignity and pride as we grow older that we can still pay our way as much as possible. Thank you.
I want to invite the members of the committee to chime in as I do some cleanup here, and feel free to interrupt. Ms. Jacobson, you mentioned you see age discrimination in trying to find employment. Tell us about that.
Well, when I was in between jobs, I've sent out over 100 resumes, and I had several interviews. I had one interview in a company in Sarasota, and I walked in, and there were 6 people there going to interview me simultaneously. And they were extremely impressed with not only my resume, but the things that I said in the meeting. In fact, they were nudging each other, saying, "Did you hear that? That was a great idea," etc. Vice President sent me an email and said, the next day, it was on a Thursday. We have one more candidate, but it's just a superficial thing. We'll get back to you on Tuesday. You are our #1 candidate. I have that on a written email. On Tuesday came. Wednesday came. Thursday, didn't hear from him. So I sent him an email. He said, "Oh, email in writing. Forgot to call you. We hired somebody else." Just enough time to do a background check. I was #1 on Thursday, and on Tuesday, they forgot my name. So, how old I was?
Her age.
My resume doesn't say how old I am. Well, thank you, but numbers are numbers. Oh, yes. with 6 people in the room, vice president, several, yeah.
Find out how old you are. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, and may I make a comment? I'm sorry, I know this is interjecting,
Sure.
but we've all concurred that, this is a problem. And what we're lacking here is financial education. I've told my sons, this is a do-it-yourself economy. If you don't do it for yourselves, no one else is going to do it for you. But how are they going to learn how to do it for you? We need financial education in high schools and in college, and it's got to be mandatory. You can't let companies default on their pension promises and then go, hey, do it yourself. Well, how are they going to do it yourself if they don't know how to do it? Let's have financial education. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Dr. Johnson had noted that the median value of retirement accounts held by households in the age range of 55 to 64 is $100,000. Retirement accounts. The median retirement account balance for 55 to 64 for all households, believe it or not, we have a study here, $12,000. Median retirement account balance, 55 to 64, for households with savings, $120,000. So that doesn't go very far, does it, Dr. Johnson?
No, it certainly doesn't. If you were to annuitize that amount at age 65 today, you'd maybe get $500, $600 a month. So it helps, every little bit helps, but it's not going to allow you to live comfortably, and that really is a challenge we face, how to get those account balances larger. And that's why people have been talking about this auto-escalation, auto-enrollment, to get people into, I think part of the problem is that a lot of people don't participate at all in their 401k plans. First you have people who aren't offered 401k plans, then you have people who are offered them who don't participate, people who participate but don't invest enough, people who deplete some of their assets before they retire because they dip into their assets, they take loans from this money, they take them out when they change jobs. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong along the way to retirement, and it's a major problem. I think we should also look at, though, that there's a lot of attention, or there's this thinking that the defined benefit world was so much better. The defined benefit world didn't work that well for a lot of people, though. You'd get a lot of money if you stayed on the job for a long time. If you changed jobs frequently, either choice of your own, or because the employer went bankrupt, or because for family reasons you had to move, you didn't make much in that account either.
Well, we're coming to some tough conclusions here. Work longer is one conclusion. This certainly wasn't the way it was in the previous generation. Anybody want to offer some hope?
Could I make a comment?
Please.
We're saying work longer, but when Social Security was first formed, the average life expectancy, I think, was like 65 or 66. So they were putting together a program that had a life expectancy of like 10 months or 11 months for the average person. Today, and it's too bad Senator Scott's left, but one of the problems the insurance companies are having is the life expectancy is increasing so dramatically right now that they really don't even know how to do how to put their life insurance policies together. So to say, gee, it's a shame you have to work longer, 65 today isn't 65 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I would submit it's not even the same as it was 10 years ago. If you're going to live till you're 85 or 89 or 90, maybe we want people to keep working longer so that they can provide a function in the society, but also I would think it'd be more interesting for them to keep working longer than, all of a sudden, I don't think most of us are set up for 40-year retirements. That's sort of not where we are. I was also going to quickly mention that one of the things in the tax code that I think
Let me
is not-
interrupt you
Oh,
there.
sure.
Senator Warren has a go.
So I just want to push back on that notion, though. I understand that people are living longer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that someone can work longer. Living until you're 85 does not mean you can still manage a construction job at 65.
True.
Or that you can still take care of small children where there's lots of bending and lifting and carrying.
Right.
Or that you can still work as a nurse. That there are so many jobs, well, that require you to be strong, that require or that have battered people's bodies for years.
Well, I agree with that, Senator, but I'm just saying that there's a lot of jobs out there where people are being put out to pasture at age 65, and 65 is a very vital person today.
Well,
and so I'm almost turning it on its head, saying these forced retirement ages that companies are coming up with are really not, they don't fit with today and who people are at 65 today.
Maybe we're just describing different
Right,
parts
we've
of
got
the
different-
problem, because I think I would say this the other way around. As I understand it, we don't have most forced retirement ages anymore. What we've got
We do.
are people who are trying to work and who can't get work, or people for whom it is just not possible to continue to work for years to come. And the question is how we're going to manage longer retirement periods. And I think expecting people to work until they're 68, 70, 72 is just not realistic and, frankly, just not right. For those who want to work, for those who can work, for those who can find the right kinds of jobs and part-time jobs, I'm all for it.
Right.
But if we think the solution to dealing with the coming economic crisis around retirement is to expect people to work until they're 72, I just think that's wrong. I don't think we can do that, and I don't think we should be looking in that direction. Sorry, Senator.
Okay. I want to raise a very contentious issue that we are going to face shortly if there is a grand bargain. And who knows in this political environment what's going to happen. But one of the suggested parts of a grand bargain is to make Social Security more actuarially sound by not increasing the tax on higher level income folks, but rather altering the CPI from the existing one to what is known as chained CPI, which is still being evaluated. But the essence is that it's a lower CPI than the existing one. Therefore, seniors' monthly payments on Social Security would be a little less. Does anybody want to have any comment about that? Yes, ma'am. Ms. Jacobs.
Then you're talking life and death, because it can't get any lower, and people can't live.
Can I chime in?
We're talking food, we're talking just food. People can't live.
Ms. Jacobs, I think what the senator might have been saying is if, let's say that you come to retirement age and you've done quite well in your life, but you have other people that basically haven't done quite as well in their life, and they need that. That's the substance they have.
Yes.
Do you think the society, and this is a discussion that goes on, would society be able to have a flexible, let's say my parents have done very well, and they might not need the CPI. They might not need the cost of living.
Right.
And they're above 250% of the poverty guidelines. Their income is still 60, 70, 80,000 a year of investments in that. But someone who basically needs it to adjust to their rent and their utilities and that would get it.
Okay.
My parents wouldn't be upset. My parents would not be upset to say, guess what, John and Mary, you all are not going to get the COLA. But Aunt Teresa over here will get the COLA because she didn't do quite as well. They could live with that, but we can't come to grips politically with that.
Right.
It's either a change CPI or changing the whole COLA, you know, the amount.
Yeah.
There's just some people that basically have done very well. They're going to get their Social Security because they paid into it. but they don't automatically have to get, nor do I think they would demand or think that it's unfair if they didn't get a COLA, so that we can keep COLA for the people that really need it.
Right.
Because everybody's paid into Social Security.
Right.
Does that make sense to you?
It does, and I've been paying into it since I was 15. And you're right, but at what level? What
Well, let's say,
discriminatory
I don't know,
level?
200, I'll use 250% of the poverty guidelines. So take whatever the poverty guidelines is in your state,
Right.
and then 250% above that. And if you still have that, I'm just using hypothetically. But this is discussions that we have that go on, and they're not done in public, but it needs to be talked about. Is there social acceptance to? I know I've talked to my family members who are older, and they would say, as long as I get my Social Security back, I'm okay. I'm okay if I don't get the COLA. I'm still in pretty good shape. But I can tell you, our neighbor over here, she has to have it. She has to have it.
Right. Right. And
Yes.
I'm a generous person. I feel the same way you do. But is everybody else going to? Are your constituents going to?
Well, I don't know. This is just, that's what you have to have. Around here, they're afraid to have your guilt by conversation, let alone guilt by association. So they're afraid to even talk about things.
And that's why I said it was a contentious issue. Now, interestingly, the flip side of that is you could solve the Social Security actuarial problem, and there is an actuarial problem, and you all have described it. We've got a lot more people that are coming into the system than are paying into it. A lot more people that are beneficiaries is what I meant. Now, you could, on the level of someone's salary, $110,000, you could impose a Social Security tax on the amount of income above that. I don't know the specific amount of the tax, but you could virtually solve the actuarial problem for Social Security with that.
I think, again, what we're talking about is if you make $250,000 a year, and at 110, you quit taking my 6.2% participation. Should that go up to at least to what the value of the dollar was when we started at, when 110 went in effect, and would it be 180 or 190 today? There has to be a reasonable way to do it, a responsible, and nobody thinks it's gouging, but just done in a way that this would have been the natural increments that should be today. That's where I think the cash flow might take care of itself, but there's people that say, that's just raising the taxes, you know.
Senator Collins.
Thank you. I just want to point out that when the president proposed moving to a chained CPI, he also proposed increasing the minimum benefit. And I think when we have this discussion, that's really important to remember. And the minimum benefit, as I said in my opening statement, it's only about $15,000 a year. So I think you can't look at just the proposal for the chained CPI without looking at the fact that if it were desirable to move to that, you have to increase the minimum benefit. Because from my perspective, someone who has worked their entire life should not retire in poverty. That ought to be one of our baseline goals. I noticed Dr. Mitchell was trying to jump in here if we could hear from her.
With your permission, thank you. I would only say that in the view of many economists, the issue about how to correctly measure inflation is really a completely different discussion than the issue of whether we can fix poverty in old age. And in my view, personally, if the chain CPI is a better way to measure the cost of living for seniors, then we should do it. But we also need to focus on the issue of inadequate ability and control over resources, inadequate consumption. And so I will only say in passing that I was on the bipartisan 2001 Commission to Strengthen Social Security, and we did propose, aside from private accounts, I'm not going there, we did propose a change in the indexation of benefits prior to retirement, and that generated enough money to raise survivor benefits, which are very important, and also to raise minimum benefits to 120% of the poverty line. So let's just stop there, but I wanted to bring that to your attention.
Senator
But
Warren?
if I can, I just want to go back to the point, though, that Senator Manchin raised. When Senator Manchin talks about the difference between using a chain CPI for some people and perhaps not for others, what you're really doing is just acknowledging that at least as the chain CPI has been laid out, we're just talking about over time a cut in benefits. And I think that Senator Collins goes to the right point when she says the fundamental question we have to address is whether the benefits are adequate. And then we have to find the right way to grow them over time for people. But that's the baseline question. And pretending that this is a question that somehow goes away if we use a different inflation index, I think just misses the whole point. We've got to make sure we are paying people enough, exactly as you said, Senator Collins, so that people are not retiring in poverty.
If I can just chime in. I've talked to enough people on the bottom of the food chain and the top of the food chain that, and this is something socially that we have to come to grips as policymakers. Basically, we have to have a cost of living, or COLA, no matter what you call it. Let's say that even the present formula that we're using to do our COLAs with. But there has to be one that adequately takes into account, the essential living cost of people that basically the majority of that income is their Social Security check. But on the other hand, there are people that basically have done so well, the 110 that they've been capped at, you follow me, that Social Security check is not make or break them. They don't need it, don't look for it, but they do deserve it because they paid into it. So we don't want to take anything away, but I've found it to be more receptive for the people who have done well at the food chain. I don't know where the breaking point would be. I use 250, could be 300%. We could all come to an agreement on what it should be. But to me, that would be a more compassionate way of doing it and making sure the people that haven't done as well are able to have enough of an adjustment that they can keep lights on, food on the table, and take care of themselves. And the people on the top end don't feel like you've kept a benefit away from them. That might be something we should be looking at. We're looking at revamping and really reinventing the wheel. And you said if it really represents the purchasing power, Dr. Mitchell, then that's what we should be done. I can tell you right now it's not being bought that way, as Senator Warren had said. People, and I know that we've had that presentation made to us that Senator Collins spoke about, that there are certain preventions and certain stopgaps that really help people in certain categories of the chain CPI. It just hasn't been accepted that way. So with that being said, would they accept another approach? That's all we're doing, and we're doing this out in a public forum as today. We need to be able to talk about this because there are certain people in my state can't make it. And Social Security in the state of West Virginia, 60% of retired seniors, that is their income. Yes, ma'am.
One comment about the idea of increasing the level at which you keep paying on Social Security is for small businesses, particularly those who are sole proprietors. They end up paying Social Security for themselves as an employee, and then they pay for it for themselves as an employer. So as you move that number up, that would really hit the small business community very hard.
Any other comments from the senators? Well, this has been a most helpful discussion. And I think, as you, Mrs. Paula, indicated, the three-legged stool, Social Security, a person's employment, pension, or retirement, and their private savings. We see how important it is for all of them. And any one of them may get cut, which then, Ms. Jacobson, gets to the point that seniors rely on that Social Security benefit because if they have the misfortune that you have chronicled today, then what is the safety net? Okay, now, we're just got into today the discussion of having long-term care. And what we're going to do is in another month, we're going to have a hearing on long-term care. We've scheduled that for October the 23rd. So thank you all for participating, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just want to thank you all for your testimony. Thank you. Excellent job. Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you for being here.
Thank you all. We're just basically, we've been thinking of different ways. And I do it by my family. Some people have done very well in family, and some people that haven't. And the ones who did well, we definitely give up a quote.
I can't say this on behalf of the SPCA, but it made sense to me. And also, I understand what you're saying.
But you have to have waiver provisions for occupation of work. You know that. Healthcare.